For many of us, SpongeBob is the first cartoon we ever watched. Well, not me, I was like 6 when SpongeBob first aired, and even then I didn't really watch it. None of that matters. We're all very well versed in our favorite sea and or kitchen sponge that may or may not be immortal, that also has intelligence. And I use the term intelligence very loosely, he's more of an idiot savant. He's always ready to take on the day, making Krabby Patties, annoying his neighbors. SpongeBob is always on the move. But SpongeBob also serves as the source of many theories, many of which we've already covered. We have a long history of covering SpongeBob on this show. We even compiled 7 of our favorites in a video a long time ago. Check that out to see me wander around Toronto because I forgot I was supposed to host that week. But even in that video, one theory is featured in a video that actually was our 3rd ever episode of Cartoon Conspiracy, so consider this video a sort of reboot/revisiting of it. It's one you might already be familiar with too. Are the denizens of Bikini Bottom the mutations of atomic testing? Anyone who's read a history book knows that there's a distinct similarity between Bikini Bottom and Bikini Atoll. In fact, for most of us, the first time we ever heard the term Bikini Atoll, we thought about Bikini Bottom, because both were islands, or strips of islands, that bore the name Bikini. Incidentally, the bikini, the swimsuit, in fact does get the name from the Bikini Atoll. The designer of the bikini, engineer and Six Flags man impersonator Louis Real borrowed the name from the atoll, bikini being a mutation of the Marshallese Pikini, roughly translating to land of coconuts. The P changed to a B when the Germans colonized the islands. Granted, that's not exactly common knowledge, but the similarity in names is basically what spawned the theory itself, but there's obviously much more to go on here. As many of you already know, the series was created by the late Stephen Hillenburg, who was actually a well-learned man who both loved and taught marine biology, with the characters for SpongeBob originally being used as a tool to teach about undersea ecology in a short comic called The Intertidal Zone. Born in Oklahoma to a military family, Hillenburg eventually lived in Anaheim, California, where he developed his love for the sea. Besides his passion for snorkeling, he also had a talent for art. He studied both of these, which friends apparently ribbed him for, saying that he should just draw fish instead. Ironically, Hillenburg thought that that would be too boring, and yet, here we are in 2022 still talking about his creations. He worked at the Orange County Marine Institute in Dana Point, California, where he taught tide pool ecology, nautical history, diversity, and adaptation. Put a pin in nautical history and adaptation, we're going to be coming back to those. He later went on to study animation before being hired by Nickelodeon, working as a director for Rocko's Modern Life before eventually optioning his own series about sea creatures. As the theory goes, SpongeBob and his friends are actually living underneath the Bikini Atoll, the Pacific Proving Ground at which the US government conducted 23 nuclear weapons tests from 1946 to 1958 in their nuclear arms race during the Cold War. Also an oopsie of a human rights violation, since the US displaced the entire local population to relocate for the tests, and then they were like, we didn't account for the fallout, so you can never go home, actually. Well, try not to get sick from all the radiation. Isn't history fun? I don't know how to recover from what I just said and pivot back to SpongeBob. The theory for our purposes is that the nuclear fallout from these operations polluted the water and caused mutations within the inhabitants of the sea. This isn't such a weird idea, honestly. Even SpongeBob's voice actor, the impossibly prolific Tom Kenny, has said that he believes that Bikini Bottom was obviously named after Bikini Atoll. But beyond this, we're actually shown several times that the events of the show take place under the Bikini Atoll. In the original SpongeBob movie, during the Goofy Goober song, the camera actually pulls out of Bikini Bottom all the way into orbit. The camera zooms out from an ocean area just about halfway between Hawaii and Australia. No points for guessing what else just happens to sit right in that area. Oh look, the Marshall Islands! Bikini Atoll, how did that get there? Alright, here's another thing. It's been pointed out that during these nuclear tests, some of the derelict ships the US government was also using the area as a ship graveyard had chipmunks in them, which apparently is why Sandy wears a protective suit. I mean, Sandy's not a chipmunk, she's a squirrel, and that suit is for, you know, living underwater, because she's a squirrel. But the one thing that is true is that she's there to study undersea life, and radiation testing is included among her many experiments. Also, while that chipmunk thing has been stated, it's pretty hard to 100% fact check. In the episode SpongeBob You're Fired, when SpongeBob is quote-unquote fun-employed, he attempts to get a job from Sandy, who's actually testing what sorts of things she can get people to eat. And among these things is toxic waste, which produces various mutations in those who eat them. This is funny because currently scientists have found various sea life dwelling in Bikini Atoll that do indeed eat radioactive material. The whole area's flora and fauna is more or less teeming with radioactive fallout up to this day. In the episode Shell of a Man, Mr. Krabs goes to a Navy Buddies meeting in the Bikini Bottom Convention Hall, and guess what real-life object depicts the building? A nuclear weapon. I'm not even kidding. Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob walk into what looks like a nuclear bomb that's sitting at the bottom of the sea, having never gone off. Maybe it's one of the at least 6 nuclear weapons that the US just lost. They're unaccounted for. Wow, I keep really bringing this video down, huh? But hey, maybe that bomb is leaking toxic material. It's not impossible to think that this could happen. Some people even take Rock Bottom, the area where SpongeBob ended up stranded in when he got on the wrong bus, to be the crater of one of these nuclear weapons, viewing the various strange fish there as proof. And yeah, a lot of these fish are strange. Massively sized fish, not too unlike the catfish often reported near Chernobyl. Others with only one eye, male fish laying eggs. There aren't many fish anywhere in SpongeBob's world that quite look like these. Even the trenchbillies bear a close Bikini Bottom-eyed visage, despite the oddness in their eyes, which is probably in reference to them living deep enough that the sun and therefore light doesn't reach them. But not the rock bottomites. The only rock bottom fish that looks anywhere close to a Bikini Bottom fish is the anglerfish who helped SpongeBob get home. But even SpongeBob's official YouTube channel discusses this fish, stating that he's out of place, being that he comes off a bus when he first shows up and speaks without Rock Bottom's accent. All the other fish seem otherworldly and, in some cases, just jarring. Even the soil speaks. It's obvious that something is incredibly wrong here, but is it really atomic mutation? So we mentioned that Tom Kenny said that he was sure Bikini Atoll and Bikini Bottom shared the similar names because the latter was named after the former. But he also said in that same interview with the Huffington Post that while it is what he believes, he also believes that the world of SpongeBob to be a separate, distinct world from our own, referring mostly to the point that the show doesn't rely heavily on cultural name drops or topical humor in an effort to keep the series timeless. An Easter egg or reference that the viewers may recognize doesn't necessarily denote an absolute connection. The big exception, however, would be guest stars. Oftentimes, real-world actors get their own cameos in the show, such as Bob Barker playing Bob Barnacle or Johnny Depp as Jack Kahuna Laguna. This in its own way insinuates that SpongeBob's undersea world is more of a parallel universe to our own, where every person has their own undersea counterpart, where it's possible that the events of the nuclear testing never occurred. One could surmise that World War II might have occurred, as the episode Krusty Krab training video gives some history to Mr. Krabs, stating that after the war he founded the Krusty Krab. However, this isn't exactly definitive, as it's never stated what war the war was, not even when it occurred. It's also true that Mr. Krabs served in the Navy, though his official position has been described as a chef as opposed to a fighter. As for the nuclear weapon where Mr. Krabs visited his old Navy buddies, that could be nothing more than a sunken torpedo, which is reinforced by the propellers at the end of the device. For Sandy, we need to look at what it is she's actually doing. She appears to be part of many scientific communities, but the ones that appear to be funding her work are the chimps who appear in the episode Chimps Ahoy. In the episode, it's revealed that they funded her underwater tree dome, and the ones that pay her in exchange for her new inventions, such as the automatic banana peeler she made, which feels like she didn't need to be underwater to develop that? In any case, her primary objective is simply to develop inventions and study fish. As for the rock bottom fish, well, they're just deep sea fish. Don't get me wrong, the trenchbillies are deep sea fish too, but nowhere near the level of the rock bottomites. While they may look different, they're likely meant to evoke the odd nature of deep sea fish. Things get wild when the sun doesn't penetrate the ocean's surface, and a lot of deep sea fish can look more like aliens than anything we're familiar with. You want to talk about a fish with one eye? Some fish down there don't have any eyes. And as for the apparently male fish that spit out eggs, that doesn't necessarily mean it's some unnatural mutation. Some fish are hermaphrodites, meaning they're either both male and female, or they contain characteristics of both in at least one point of their life. Nature is just like that. Some creatures even reproduce asexually, as they have everything they need to do so themselves. Sponges like SpongeBob are actually among this class. Sea sponges can reproduce both sexually and asexually via splitting apart, much like SpongeBob has shown in the past. Cut a sea sponge in half and you don't get a dead sea sponge, you just get 2 sea sponges. I actually already talked about this in a way earlier episode about SpongeBob being either immortal and/or a series of clones, so that's fun, check that out. All of this being said, the citizens of Rock Bottom are different because their bodies have had to adapt to the challenging amount of pressure and lack of light the deep sea provides. The only thing I can't explain is the talking green soil. Granted, the groundwater in the Bikini Atoll and surrounding area is still contaminated to this day, making the area pretty uninhabitable to people, but that's not really the same thing. But let's go back to that thing Tom Kenny said about SpongeBob being its own world, as noted by guest stars voicing characters that aren't, themselves. But that's not strictly true, as it's become less and less true with every passing year since that interview. We already know that the real world exists. We've seen it multiple times in the movies, such as David Hasselhoff appearing, as well as all through Sponge Out of Water. And even in the cartoon show itself, we see Patchy the Pirate, who lives in real world Encino, California, also played by Tom Kenny. Not to mention Sandy, the Texan. Even for the everyone has their own undersea counterpart argument, as we mentioned earlier, this isn't due to being in another dimension, but simply because everyone does. In SpongeBob's own universe, on the surface we see Tom Kenny, as well as Clancy Brown, Bill Fagerbakke, and even Carolyn Lawrence, the voices of SpongeBob, Mr. Krabs, Patrick, and Sandy respectively, playing identical humans with similar jobs and parallel names, like Jim Bob, Mr. Slabs, Manword, etc. It's obvious that SpongeBob shares the same dimension as we do, but does this prove that they're mutations? One could reference the way they look. In the episodes Pressure, as well as Rodeo Days, they're portrayed out of water as normal fish. But of course this isn't always the case, as in the SpongeBob movies they're portrayed as they normally would be undersea until dried up. Also, before giving my own rating, it's worth mentioning that an anonymous staffer reportedly contacted Cracked.com recently and said that while it's viewed as a well-accepted fanfic, it's not in the show's best interest to directly confirm or debunk this particular theory. Yes, there's a bunch of in-show lore that directly contradicts this, some of which I haven't even mentioned. Yes, it's true that nuclear mutations are by and large not something that organic life can benefit from and are often detrimental to health. The point is that while some may try to 100% confirm or 100% debunk this, there's just not enough to make a firm ruling in my mind, even taking cartoon logic into account, whatever that's worth. So with that in mind, I'm going to rate the SpongeBob being a mutant theory like 3 mutant starfish out of 5. I know I seemingly debunked a lot of this, but there's just as much evidence to suggest SpongeBob's world is in our world and can be placed in the Bikini Atoll, and as said before, the atoll is still quite radioactive. While Sandy may be making inventions, it still remains that she's feeding people radioactive material. And I'm not sure where she would have gotten it other than the Bikini Atoll, but a lot of Sandy's resources are kind of suspect anyway. Mr. Krabs may or may not have fought in World War II, but if the series takes place in our world, it means World War II would have still happened, which, also had some pretty major nuclear ramifications. I do have one thing that doesn't sit particularly right for me, and I don't speak for Steven Hillenburg, but I honestly don't think that he, a lifelong enthusiast of aquatic life, would base some of his most precious characters on something as reprehensible as the human defacement of the natural landscape, especially at the time the series was conceived, before many of the reports of sea life returning to the Bikini Atoll had been published. At the same time, there is proof that their world is somehow affected by radiation. In the episode Band Geeks, Patrick notes that the humans at the football game are ugly-looking fish. SpongeBob replies that they must be from one of those toxic waste dumps, meaning that they know that radiation can affect fish, so it's still a bit all over the place. But that's just me. What about you? Do you think our favorite cleaning utensil is actually a mutant cleaning utensil? What about Mr. Krabs' service record? If you have any other theories you want us to cover, let us know in the comments, and be sure to click the like button and subscribe, and click the bell for more theories like this one. And remember, as if we'd ever let you forget, Frederator loves you.